Welcome to Episode 3 of the Battle of Aldie multiplayer game. In Part 2, we went over the cavalry skirmishing, which was occurring all over the battlefield. We looked at the battle along the Braddock Road, which had just broken out. And we took a look at the situation which was developing around Middleburg, where the Federals were quickly being cut off by the Confederate advance. We are now at the 7 a.m. staff meetings. This is the first open discussion the two sides have had since 5 a.m. and the last that they will have until 9 a.m. Beginning with the Federals, McDowell started the conversation by stating his belief that the rebels in front of my corps are doing no more than testing the waters in an effort to gauge our response. Depending on their findings, they will either go into a full offensive attack or adopt a more defensive posture with localized attacks. It will be most interesting to see which, if either, happens. Lee will not, however, engage needlessly in a bloody frontal assault if the possibility exists to flank an enemy. He was also convinced that the main Confederate attack would likely be coming to the west against Banks's force, which was then split between Middleburg and Aldie. The movements around Sykes's right flank, north of Middleburg, were of great concern to McDowell, as it appeared the rebels were looking to get around Sykes and cut him off from Aldie. Banks was in full agreement with McDowell that Sykes was endangered by the Confederates around Middleburg. Banks believed that the Federals had succeeded in drawing significant enemy forces towards Middleburg and bought more time for the rest of his corps to fortify at Aldie. Banks urged Pope to issue an immediate withdrawal order to move his troops from Middleburg back to the east to rejoin with the rest of the corps around Aldie. McDowell then chimed in to state that I am in total agreement with Banks's views. I believe the rebels may have been equally focused on surrounding and isolating Sykes as they were on taking Middleburg. Withdrawing will upset their planning and, while surrendering Middleburg, it will allow us to consolidate, shorten our lines, and prepare to deal with the rebel attack. But Banks did not necessarily agree with McDowell's assessment of the overall situation. The aggressive rebel tactics east of the mountains suggested to Banks that the main rebel attack was likely to be on that side of the battlefield as opposed to the western side of it. Pope then went ahead and issued the 7 a.m. orders for the Union Army. Banks was to fall back to Aldie, where he was to consolidate his corps and defend the main Union depot at that location. McDowell then was ordered to conduct a fighting withdrawal back to Gilbert's Corner and merge with Sigel's corps at that place. Sigel would continue to build breastworks at Gilbert's Corner and prepare the defenses ahead of McDowell's arrival. Moving over to the 7 a.m. rebel discussion, Jackson began the discussion by pondering just where Sigel's corps was. With Banks spotted in the west and McDowell in the east, the location of Sigel became a mystery. Stonewall Jackson, with his usual good estimation of his opponents, suggested that they may be building a lot of breastworks around Aldie and Gilbert's Corner. He went on to state that he was fighting McDowell in a stand-up battle with little advantage to either side, but he was confident he would soon have the edge over the Federals with his superior infantry and also his massed artillery. Lastly, with the action around Middleburg, Jackson correctly surmised that Longstreet had struck the tail end of a Federal column heading towards Aldie, and not the front of a column from Aldie heading towards Middleburg. Overall, Jackson is on fire right now. He has figured out this battlefield very well, and as of now, he's spot on with everything. A.P. Hill agreed with Jackson, and to him it seemed the Federals were moving back and forth on the turnpike without any rhyme or reason. Perhaps, Hill wrote, they changed their mind about abandoning Middleburg without a fight in case they were only just facing cavalry. Hill supported the suggestion by Jackson that his corps move up in support of his right flank to the east of the Braddock Road. Their combined forces would drive against McDowell and either force him to flee from the field or crush him where he stood. Lee chimed in to state that he doubted that the Yanks will fall back on the Braddock Road, as they are generally reluctant to do so once they've set up a defensive position. The rebels then began to discuss the possibility that Sigel's missing corps was actually heading along the eastern edge of the map, looking to strike Jackson's right flank. The 7 a.m. rebel orders given by Robert E. Lee stated that Longstreet would take Middleburg and then move east towards Aldie to uncover the Federal positions. Jackson would shift to the west of the Braddock Road in order to allow room for A.P. Hill's corps to move into a position on his right flank. Lastly, Hill would move up with Fields' division to Jackson's right flank, and there he was to make sure that the Army's extreme right was secure. Kemper's division would stay in reserve for the moment. My unasked for 2 cents about all this here. Abandoning Middleburg. Really, they need to run, not walk, to the nearest exit. They are about to be cut off, they realize it, and they need to get out as quickly as they can to minimize the damage. McDowell is in an increasingly tough position. Being ordered to fall back after you're already engaged is never an easy thing to do, and with extremely aggressive Confederate commanders on his heels, it's going to be infinitely more complicated. So Sigel might actually have to go to McDowell, not McDowell towards Sigel. I don't see how McDowell can very easily get away from his current location. It's going to be a challenge. And really, it's because the Federals have no offensive action anywhere. All the initiative right now is completely in the hands of the rebels, and they are taking advantage of it. Moving to the 7 a.m. turn now, both sides have moved. And you can see here, Sykes has began his retreat away from Middleburg. In the south, Hood has turned away from Middleburg and is moving along the middle road to try to cut off the retreat of Sykes' division. In the east, a major error has occurred, and I'm actually going to use this as a teaching example for everyone who's just watching this video. Here you see the Braddock Road at the beginning of the Confederate turn. And when you look at the Federal line, you can see that it's very well built. There is lots of infantry all along it, and they have artillery in support. But a veteran player in this club will immediately look at this hex right here, because there's just 8 Federal guns sitting in that hex without any infantry support. Any aggressive commander in this club will look at this situation and just make that face right there. That's actually the face I made when I saw this turn, because aggressive players will immediately charge those guns and bag them really without any trouble at all. And that is exactly what has happened here. You should never leave your guns unguarded. If they are anywhere near the front lines, you need to have infantry support with them in that hex. Because in this situation, the 21st Georgia, they're going to lose 242 men by making this charge. And that is going to equal just under 97 points. And yeah, that's going to hurt a little bit, but the payoff is that they've eliminated 8 Federal guns, and that equals 240 points. And I'm sure right now a lot of people are discussing or thinking to themselves, man, that's a really gamey move. I don't like that. Or maybe they're thinking, that is a brilliant move. I love that move. So this conversation about whether or not something is gamey, it's always been part of this club, and I believe it always will be part of this club. However, this is just my opinion.
You play to win the game. Hello? You play to win the game.
You have to love Herm Edwards, right? That is a great football rant. Back to our game. McDowell, now that he's lost those guns, is not retreating. He didn't make any backwards actions during his turn. And I think it's because he's just fuming right now at the loss of his artillery pieces. And it is understandable, but he's not following orders. And because of that, Sigel is moving towards him. So Schurz's division is moving to the left of McDowell's corps. I think he knows that McDowell is on tilt right now, and so he's going towards him, which is what I kind of thought would happen. Over in the west, Anderson has taken Middleburg, his infantry is in the town, and the Federals are fleeing back towards Aldie. 7:40 a.m., and there are disasters all over the place for the Federals. Here, just east of Middleburg, 2 cavalry units have been completely cut off and are now isolated. Over in the north, Fitz Lee is pursuing the Federal cavalry in that direction and is threatening to capture them as well. While in the south, Hood and Anderson's divisions, they're coming for Sykes, and if Sykes doesn't move quickly, his entire division could be in jeopardy. In the far east, Schurz's division is arriving on McDowell's flank and are beginning to move into battle line. The Confederates can see them arriving, but they don't have any idea of what the size of the force is yet. But for right now, McDowell is neutralized. He is neither falling back nor advancing. He is flat-footed, and that is always a very dangerous position to be in any game. And because of that, the Federals have called an emergency meeting. Each side gets 2 of these throughout the entire game, and this was their first. And it's simply because everything is going wrong right now. McDowell began by stating his belief, once more, that the Confederates were stacking up west of the mountains in preparation for a major push on Aldie from the west and the south. He felt there were likely 2 corps moving on Middleburg, with just 1 in the east on his front. McDowell also stated that the Confederate attack on his front seemed to have fizzled out for the present, and he believed it was launched merely to keep him pinned in place while the rebels moved their forces west of the mountains. Banks stated that he was falling back towards Aldie with all of his forces in order to meet the oncoming Confederate attack with a solid defensive front. He proposed McDowell fall back to Gilbert's Corner in order to free up Sigel to send assistance to the west if needed. Pope, though, admitted that the decision to try and fight at Middleburg was a major mistake, and that he had waited too long in ordering McDowell to pull back ahead of the Confederate attack along the Braddock Road. But he still felt there was time enough to correct these errors, but there wasn't much time. Pope issued some new orders to try to regain control of this battle. First off, Banks was to send Scammon's brigade south along the mountain trails to eventually come in on McDowell's right flank and secure it. The rest of Banks's corps was to protect Aldie after they fell back. Meanwhile, Sigel would follow Schurz's division with the rest of his corps and attack the Confederate right flank, then threatening McDowell's flank. For McDowell, though, he was now being ordered once more to fall back north towards Gilbert's Corner. My unasked for 2 cents about this: are the Federals falling back, or are they attacking? Because Sigel is attacking, but McDowell is retreating. What is going on here? If McDowell was falling back, you would think he would fall back on a line that Sigel was creating. And if Sigel was attacking, you would think that McDowell would stay in place with all of his artillery in order to hold the Confederates in place. But neither one of those things is happening. They're doing both simultaneously, and it's pretty confusing. The Confederates simply have them mystified right now. They believe that there are possibly 2 corps in the west and that the main attack will happen there. But in reality, only Anderson's division has even fired a shot in the west, and Hood's division hasn't engaged anybody. So there's only 2 divisions in the west, not 2 corps. Also, the Federal Army is being chopped up right now. The rebels continue to isolate and capture lone units, gaining chunks of points, and all these add up. After the 8 a.m. turn, this is how the battlefield looks. And those were some painful roadblocks. The Federal cavalry units that were isolated did manage to slow down the Confederates, but it cost them a lot of points and a lot of men. Scammon has turned south from Aldie, and his brigade is moving to the right flank of McDowell. In the east, Jackson and Hill have merged along the Braddock Road. And is Field reinforcing Jackson, or is he going to the east? It's really confusing at present. And because of that, the rebels have called their emergency meeting. And this really wasn't an emergency. Felt like it was just an organizational chat. Because for the rebels, much of the discussion revolved around how best to deploy Fields' division and what exactly the Federals were up to. A.P. Hill stated his intention remained to reinforce Jackson's right flank, but that the southern withdrawal of the Federals along the Braddock Road and their simultaneous advance against Jackson's right had caused him some confusion. And I think it's actually caused a lot of confusion on both sides, because are the Federals attacking? Are they retreating? What is going on here? Longstreet stated he saw no problems in the west and would continue his methodical approach on Aldie while filling out the Union lines. The Yankees falling back in the east, though, had Lee questioning things as well. I do not think it advisable that we attack just any defensive line they throw up. In fact, I do not see any need for us to attack them. An aggressive defense may be the answer in the east for a while. In the end, the rebels opted to continue their operations along the same lines they already had been, which I suppose is what an aggressive defense is. McDowell's movements would be monitored, and they would try to figure out why he was retreating and whether the movement on his left flank was part of a Federal counterattack or not. Longstreet would keep up the pressure on the Federals in the west, and Jackson would attempt to keep sliding to the west while Hill moved to the eastern flank. Keeping these two forces organized and separate was a growing concern in the limited space east of the mountains. My unasked for 2 cents really quick here. It was kind of an oddly used emergency meeting as there was no real emergency to discuss. The orders from 8 a.m. were largely just reiterated, and Jackson and Hill were reminded to try and keep their forces separate rather than becoming too intermixed and jeopardizing command control. And if you recall, way back at the start of all these videos, I said that any action east of the mountains would become confusing and disorganized as the single road would not allow for any simple maneuvering. For an army that is successfully driving the enemy back on all fronts, the Confederates actually seem baffled by their own momentum and their own success. And this is really just a general statement to anyone in this similar situation. It is the time to attack. If the enemy has limbered up their guns and they're falling back and their cavalry is moving and they have lots of moving parts, you need to strike them, because if they keep moving, they will never have an opportunity to turn and fight you again. After the 8:20 a.m. turn now, there has been skirmishing all along the front between Jackson and McDowell, as McDowell's guns are all limbered up and moving to the rear, and his infantry is quickly following them. At Aldie, Banks's corps is building a new defensive line and are trying to prepare for the Confederate attack they feel is coming. The 8:40 a.m. turn, and in the north, the Federal cavalry is nearly surrounded. The Federal cavalrymen had an opportunity during the last turn to ride to safety towards Aldie. Instead, they only used half their movement points, and as a result, have stayed too far to the north. At Aldie, Banks's corps is circling the wagons. They know the Confederates are coming, and they're trying quickly to get into place to block all the major approaches. Over in the east, McDowell has continued his retreat north along the Braddock Road. So, at the end of this 2-hour stretch, here is my unasked for 2 cents. I'm going to concentrate just on the eastern side of the battlefield for now, because I want to talk about the importance of maneuvering and momentum. McDowell's corps began the morning in a position right about here on the map. And over the last hour, 2 hours, they've been pushed all the way back north by Jackson's men and then Hill's corps as well. Meanwhile, Sigel's corps has moved from Gilbert's Corner to support their left flank. And the Federals have fallen back over a mile now from their original positions. And it was all done because of really superior artillery usage by the Confederates. The Federal guns just were never in the proper positions, and the Confederates massed their artillery in really intelligent ways and positions in order to bring the entire Federal line under their guns. And there was pressure everywhere, especially along either flank of the Confederate advance. And when they built up all that pressure, the Federals simply couldn't hold. And it seems remarkable because Sigel and McDowell, with their cavalry support, have over 41,000 men just on that part of the map that you can see there, while Jackson and Hill have just 26,000 men attacking them. And Kemper's division has not even been engaged at all. They are still marching towards the battle and are on the southern part of that map there. Which means that it's really not 26,000 men, it's 21,000 men. And they have pushed the Federals back, as I said, well over a mile. And it's so crazy because the Confederates aren't even aware of what they're doing exactly. They still believe they are up against a single enemy corps. And maybe that's why they're being so aggressive. They just don't know the odds are against them. And when you read the comments that the Confederates are making, you can really tell that they have no concept of the odds that they are going against. What kind of battle are they fighting? Where's their Third Corps? Well, actually, they've already engaged the Federal Third Corps on Jackson's right flank. They just don't know it yet because it doesn't seem that there's any strength behind it. While A.P. Hill wrote that the Federals seem to be directing significant portions of their army to the west rather than to the south. Well, no, actually, it's the opposite. The Federals are actually pulling troops from the west towards the south and not from the south towards the west. So you can see how there's a lot of confusion in this battle right now, really on both sides. The Confederates, though, they're pushing back the Federals on both sides of the mountain with half as many men engaged. So you can't really argue with their success. And you all know this famous quote by Stonewall Jackson, so I'm not going to read it. But if there was ever a battle that I've watched that perfectly personifies this, this is it. For the Federals, they need to play smarter. They've had a lot of unforced errors. They've left guns unprotected, they've put cavalry in their front lines, and they've been isolated and captured on numerous occasions. And they have to stop losing these chunks of men, because all those points, they add up over time. Also, the Federals now have their backs to the river at Aldie. They can't fall back anymore. So they need to dig in and prepare for whatever comes their way. What am I looking forward to in the next part? Well, can McDowell regain his footing? He's fallen back to the north right now. His artillery is all numbered up, and there's a lot of moving pieces with his corps. And will a battle occur at Aldie? Are the Confederates actually going to attack towards the town? If they do, they'll be greatly outnumbered, but all the momentum seems to be on their side. Lastly, Jones's division. Where are you? You might recall that Jones's division is still stationed miles to the south, protecting the Confederate bases there. And there's really no reason for that because the Confederates have eyeballs all over the map. They aren't about to be surprised at any one of their objectives. Therefore, Jones's division should already be marching to the north. Well, I really appreciate everyone watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Be sure to check out the next episode and have a good rest of your day.